Let me ask you something, and I don't want you to answer me quick. I want you to feel it. Is God first? Or is he just convenient? Because a lot of us say God first on Sunday, but by Monday morning, stress is first, money is first, opinions are first, fear is first. And I came to challenge you today, not to shout, not to impress you, but to wake something up in you. Because when God is truly first, everything else doesn't just fall in line, it falls into purpose. See, putting God first isn't a slogan, it's a lifestyle. It's how you think, how you move, how you decide when nobody's watching. So today, we're not just talking about faith, we're talking about alignment, we're talking about surrender, we're talking about a shift that will change everything. The question is, are you ready to stop saying it and start living it? You don't struggle to put God first because you don't love him. You struggle because something else has your priority. And that truth can be uncomfortable because it forces you to confront what's really sitting at the center of your life. It's easy to say you love God. It's easy to lift your hands, to sing the songs, to post the quotes, to declare your faith when everything around you feels aligned with that confession. But love, real love, the kind that transforms your life, is revealed in what you prioritize when life gets complicated, when emotions get heavy, when decisions require sacrifice. Because the reality is, whatever you prioritize shapes you. It trains your thoughts, directs your energy, and ultimately determines your outcome. If fear is your priority, then your decisions will always be filtered through anxiety. If approval is your priority, then you will constantly bend yourself to fit into spaces that were never designed for your authenticity. If comfort is your priority, then growth will always feel like a threat instead of an invitation. And if God is not your priority, then you will find yourself trying to carry a life you were never meant to sustain on your own. Sometimes we don't even realize what has taken God's place. It's subtle. It's not always obvious rebellion or outright rejection. Sometimes it's busyness. Sometimes it's ambition. Sometimes it's the need to control outcomes because trusting God feels too uncertain, and so we hold on tightly to what we can see, what we can manage, what we can predict. But in doing that, we slowly shift God from being the center of our lives to being an option we consult when everything else fails. And the truth is, God was never meant to be your backup plan. He was meant to be your foundation. There's a difference between inviting God into your plans and building your plans around God. One keeps you in control, the other requires surrender. One allows you to maintain your sense of comfort, the other stretches you into a deeper level of faith. And if you're honest, surrender is not always easy. It asks you to release timelines, to let go of outcomes, to trust a process you don't fully understand. But what you gain in that surrender is something you can't manufacture on your own. You gain alignment. Alignment changes everything. When God is first, your decisions begin to shift. Your perspective begins to shift. Even your response to challenges begins to shift. You're no longer reacting out of fear or insecurity, but responding from a place of trust. You're no longer chasing validation because you're already anchored in identity. You're no longer striving to prove your worth because you understand that your value is already established. But getting to that place requires honesty. It requires you to ask yourself the hard questions. What do I run to first when I feel overwhelmed? What voice do I listen to the most when I'm making decisions? What consumes my thoughts when I wake up and when I go to sleep? Because whatever consistently occupies your mind and your energy has already taken a seat of priority in your life. And this is not about condemnation. This is about awareness. Because you cannot shift what you refuse to acknowledge. You cannot put God first if you're not willing to identify what has been standing in his place. And sometimes that something else is not even a bad thing. It could be your career, your family, your goals, things that are good, things that matter. But even good things can become misplaced when they take the position that belongs to God. Putting God first is not about perfection. It's about intentionality. It's about choosing moment by moment to bring him into every part of your life. Not just the spiritual parts, not just the moments when you feel strong in your faith, but the messy parts, the uncertain parts, the moments when you don't have the answers. It's about creating space for him in your thoughts, in your decisions, in your daily routines. And that kind of life doesn't happen accidentally. It requires discipline. It requires consistency. It requires you to be mindful of what you're feeding your spirit, what you're allowing to influence your perspective, what you're giving your attention to. Because your attention is powerful. What you focus on grows. What you invest in multiplies. And if God is not receiving your attention, then something else is benefiting from it. But here's the beautiful part. Every day is an opportunity to realign. You don't have to stay stuck in misplaced priorities. You don't have to continue living in a cycle of saying one thing and doing another. You can choose right now to shift, to refocus, to bring God back to the center where he belongs. And when you do, you'll begin to notice something different. Peace will start to replace anxiety. Clarity will begin to replace confusion. Strength will rise up in areas where you once felt weak. Not because your circumstances have changed immediately, but because your foundation has shifted. You're no longer trying to navigate life on your own understanding. You're no longer carrying the weight of trying to control everything. You're learning to trust, to lean, to depend. Putting God first is not about losing control. It's about releasing the illusion that you ever had it. It's about recognizing that the same God who created you is fully capable of sustaining you, guiding you, and leading you into purpose. But that only happens when he is not just a part of your life, but the center of it. So if you've been struggling, don't just question your love for God, examine your priorities. Because love is not just something you say, it's something you demonstrate. And when God is truly first, it will show up in how you live, how you choose, and how you trust him with every part of your life. God is not fighting for first place in your life. You're the one deciding who sits on the throne every single day. And that truth shifts the entire narrative, because it means your life isn't being controlled by circumstance as much as it's being shaped by choice. Every day you wake up, there is a quiet decision being made. Not always with words, not always with intention, but with your actions, your focus, your response to what life throws at you. Something is always sitting on the throne of your heart. And whatever occupies that seat determines how you live, how you love, and how you lead yourself through every moment. The throne is not a casual place. It represents authority. It represents influence. It represents the highest level of trust. And many times, without even realizing it, we place things on that throne that were never designed to carry that kind of weight. We allow fear to sit there, and suddenly every decision we make is filtered through worst-case scenarios. We allow people to sit there, and suddenly their opinions dictate our sense of worth. We allow our past to sit there, and suddenly we are living in cycles that keep us bound to what we should have already outgrown. And yet we wonder why we feel overwhelmed, why we feel unstable, why we feel like we're constantly trying to keep everything from falling apart. It's because the throne has been occupied by something that cannot sustain you. Anything other than God will eventually collapse under the pressure of being your source, your guide, and your foundation. It's not that those things don't matter. It's that they were never meant to matter more than him. What makes this so challenging is that many of these things don't look wrong. They look necessary. They look urgent. They look like responsibilities you can't ignore. And so you convince yourself that you're doing what you have to do, that you'll make space for God later, that once things settle down, you'll refocus. But ladder has a way of becoming a lifestyle. And before you know it, God is no longer the center. He's an afterthought. But the truth is, God doesn't need to compete for your attention. He doesn't need to prove his worth. He doesn't need to fight his way onto the throne. The power of choice has always been in your hands. You are the one who decides what gets your time, your energy, your devotion. You are the one who decides what voice carries the most weight in your life. And once you understand that, you also realize that you have the authority to change it. That doesn't mean it's easy, because dethroning something that has been sitting in that place for a long time requires intentionality. It requires you to confront habits, to break patterns, to challenge the ways you've learned to cope and survive. It requires you to ask yourself why you've trusted certain things more than you've trusted God. Why you've leaned on your own understanding instead of surrendering to his wisdom. Why you've allowed temporary things to have permanent influence over your life. And sometimes the hardest part is not removing something from the throne. It's releasing the illusion of control that came with it. Because when you've relied on something long enough, it starts to feel like security. Even if it's not working, even if it's exhausting, even if it's keeping you stuck, it's familiar. And stepping away from that familiarity can feel like stepping into uncertainty. But what you have to understand is that what feels uncertain to you is not uncertain to God. When God is on the throne, your life is not built on shifting ground. It's not dependent on everything going your way. It's not rooted in what you can see or predict. It's anchored in something eternal, something unshakable, something that doesn't change when life does. And that kind of foundation gives you a different kind of strength. It allows you to face challenges without losing yourself. It allows you to move forward even when you don't have all the answers. It allows you to trust that even when things don't make sense, there is still purpose being worked out in your life. But placing God on the throne is not a one-time decision. It's a daily commitment. Because every day, life will present you with opportunities to take that seat back, to rely on your own strength, to react out of emotion, to prioritize what feels urgent over what is truly important. And in those moments, you have to be intentional about reminding yourself who truly belongs there. It shows up in the small things. It shows up in how you start your day, in what you choose to focus on, and how you respond when things don't go as planned. It shows up in your willingness to pause before making decisions, to seek guidance instead of rushing ahead, to trust even when it feels uncomfortable. Because putting God on the throne is not just about what you say, it's about how you live. And the more you practice that, the more it begins to transform you. Your priorities start to align. Your perspective begins to shift. you find yourself less driven by pressure and more guided by purpose. You become less reactive and more intentional. And slowly, the things that once held power over you begin to lose their grip because they are no longer sitting in a place they were never meant to occupy. This is not about being perfect. It's about being aware. It's about recognizing when something has taken a place it shouldn't have and having the courage to realign. It's about understanding that you have the power to choose again, to refocus, to recenter your life around what truly matters. So every day you have a decision to make. Who sits on the throne? Is it your fear, your past, your need for control, your desire for approval, or is it God? Because that decision will shape everything that follows. It will determine how you see yourself, how you navigate your challenges, and how you step into the purpose that has already been placed inside of you. God is not fighting for first place in your life. You're the one deciding who sits on the throne every single day. And when you choose to put him there, you're not just changing your priorities, you're changing your entire life. You can't ask God to lead your life if you only consult him when things fall apart. And yet, if we're honest, that's the pattern so many of us have fallen into. We live our lives making decisions on our own terms, trusting our instincts, following what feels right in the moment. And only when the ground begins to shake beneath us do we suddenly remember to pray, to seek, to ask. It's not that we don't believe in God, it's that we've limited his role in our lives to emergency intervention instead of daily direction. There's a difference between knowing God is present and actually allowing him to lead. Presence is comforting, but leadership is transformative. When someone leads, they don't just show up when things go wrong. They guide you before you ever get there. They redirect you when you're heading in the wrong direction. They slow you down when you're moving too fast and push you forward when fear is holding you back. But if you only consult God in moments of crisis, you miss the very guidance that could have prevented the crisis in the first place. It's easy to want God as a rescuer. It's harder to accept him as a leader because leadership requires trust, and trust requires surrender. And surrender is uncomfortable when you've been conditioned to rely on your own understanding. We like to feel in control. We like to have plans, timelines, strategies. We like to know what's coming next. But God's leadership doesn't always fit into our expectations. It stretches us beyond what we can see, beyond what we can predict, beyond what we can manage on our own. And so instead of fully surrendering, we compromise. We say we want God's will, but we only seek it when our will stops working. We make decisions without him and then ask him to bless them afterward. We move ahead without direction and then ask him to fix what we didn't take the time to align. And when things don't work out, we find ourselves frustrated, confused, wondering why God didn't come through. When in reality, we never gave him the opportunity to lead in the first place. Leading requires access. It requires space. It requires consistency. You cannot follow a voice you only listen to occasionally. You cannot recognize guidance you rarely seek, and you cannot expect clarity in moments of chaos if you haven't built connection in moments of calm. The relationship you have with God is not meant to be seasonal or situational. It's meant to be constant. It's meant to be woven into the fabric of your everyday life. That means inviting him into the ordinary, not just the extraordinary. It means seeking him before you make decisions, not just after they fall apart. It means creating space in your day to listen, to reflect, to be still enough to recognize his direction. Because sometimes God doesn't shout, sometimes he whispers. And if your life is too loud, too busy, too distracted, you might miss the very guidance you've been praying for. There's also a level of accountability that comes with allowing God to lead. Because once you truly seek his direction, you may be called to make choices that challenge your comfort. You may be asked to walk away from things that feel familiar but are no longer aligned. You may be led into spaces that stretch your faith, that require you to trust beyond what you can see. And that's where many people hesitate, not because they don't want God's guidance, but because they're not sure they want to follow where it leads. But what you have to understand is that God's leadership is not designed to limit you. It's designed to protect and position you. It's not about restriction. It's about alignment. It's about guiding you toward purpose, toward growth, toward a life that is rooted in something deeper than temporary success or surface level fulfillment. And when you allow him to lead, you begin to experience a different kind of life. Not a life with direction, but a life with direction. Not a life without uncertainty, but a life with peace in the midst of it. Because there's a confidence that comes from knowing you didn't arrive at a decision on your own. There's a strength that comes from knowing you are not navigating life by yourself. There's a peace that comes from trusting that even when things don't go as planned, you are still being led with intention and purpose. And that peace is not something you can create on your own. It's the result of alignment. But alignment is a daily choice. It's not something you establish once and never revisit. Every day you have the opportunity to either lead yourself or be led by God. Every day you are faced with decisions, with thoughts, with reactions that will either draw you closer to His guidance or pull you further into your own understanding. And the more you practice seeking Him, the more natural it becomes. The more you create space for Him, the more you begin to recognize His voice. The more you trust Him in small things, the more confident you become in following Him in bigger things. It starts with intentionality. It starts with choosing to pause before you move, to seek before you decide, to listen before you act. It starts with acknowledging that you don't have to figure everything out on your own, that you don't have to wait until things fall apart to bring God into the situation. That you have access to guidance, to wisdom, to direction in every moment, not just in moments of desperation. And maybe that's where the shift needs to happen, not in how much you believe in God, but in how much you rely on Him, not in how often you call on Him in crisis, but in how consistently you walk with Him in your everyday life. Because when God is not just your rescuer, but your leader, everything begins to change. You move with intention instead of reaction. You make decisions from a place of clarity instead of confusion. You navigate challenges with a sense of peace instead of panic. Not because life is perfect, but because you are no longer trying to carry it alone. You can't ask God to lead your life if you only consult Him when things fall apart. But the moment you shift from occasional consultation to consistent connection, you open yourself up to a level of guidance that transforms everything. And that transformation doesn't just change your circumstances, it changes you. Putting God first isn't about what you say publicly. It's about what you choose privately. It's about the decisions you make when there's no audience, no applause, no pressure to perform, because it's easy to look aligned on the outside. It's easy to say the right things, to show up in the right spaces, to present a version of yourself that appears deeply rooted in faith. But what happens in your private moments tells the real story. What you choose when no one is watching reveals what truly has your heart. There is a quiet space in all of our lives where image doesn't matter, where expectations fall away, where it's just you and your thoughts, your habits, your patterns, and in that space you're making decisions constantly. You're choosing what to dwell on, what to give your attention to, what to prioritize with your time and energy. Those choices may seem small, almost insignificant, but they are shaping the direction of your life in ways that are deeper than anything you display publicly. Because what you practice in private will always show up in public. You can only sustain an image for so long before your reality begins to surface. If your private life is disconnected from your public declarations, eventually the gap between the two will become impossible to ignore. And that's where many people find themselves confused, frustrated, trying to understand why they feel spiritually disconnected, even though they're saying all the right things. The truth is, alignment doesn't happen on a stage. It happens in the quiet. It happens in the moments when you choose to seek God instead of scrolling endlessly through distractions. It happens when you choose to pause and pray instead of reacting impulsively. It happens when you choose integrity over convenience, when you choose obedience over comfort, when you choose to trust even when no one else is there to validate your decision. Private choices build public strength. They form the foundation of your character, your discipline, your consistency. And if God is not first in those private spaces, then it becomes difficult to truly put Him first anywhere else, because your public life is simply an overflow of your private life. It's not separate, it's connected. What you feed in one area will always influence the other. Sometimes we underestimate the power of those quiet moments because they don't feel significant. There's no immediate reward, no recognition, no visible outcome. But that's exactly what makes them so powerful. Because when you choose God in those moments, you're not doing it for appearance, you're doing it out of conviction. You're building a relationship that is not dependent on how it looks, but on how it transforms you from the inside out. And that kind of transformation is not instant. It's gradual, it's built over time through consistency, through choosing again and again to align your thoughts, your actions, your decisions with what you know to be true. It's not about being perfect. It's about being intentional. It's about recognizing when you've drifted and making the choice to come back, even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncomfortable. Because let's be honest, private choices often come with internal battles. No one sees the struggle of choosing discipline over distraction. No one sees the moments when you have to silence negative thoughts, when you have to resist old habits, when you have to push past feelings that are pulling you in the opposite direction of where you're trying to go. Those battles are real and they require strength. But that strength is built in the very process of choosing God, even when it's hard. And over time, those choices begin to reshape you. They begin to change how you think, how you respond, how you carry yourself. You become less reactive and more grounded. You become less driven by impulse and more guided by purpose. You begin to notice a shift, not just in what you do, but in who you are becoming. That's the power of putting God first in private. It doesn't just affect your actions, it transforms your identity. It aligns you with a deeper sense of purpose, a stronger sense of direction, a more stable sense of peace. And that transformation becomes evident, not because you're trying to prove something, but because it naturally flows out of the life you're building behind the scenes. But it requires honesty. It requires you to be real with yourself about where you are, about what you're choosing, about what's truly holding your attention and influencing your decision. It requires you to let go of the need to appear a certain way and instead focus on becoming who you're called to be. Because God is not concerned with performance. He's concerned with transformation. And transformation happens when you allow him into the places no one else sees. When you invite him into your thoughts, your struggles, your doubts, your habits, when you stop separating your spiritual life from your everyday life and begin to integrate him into everything, that's when things begin to shift. That's when your faith becomes real, not just something you talk about, but something you live. So the question is not just what are you saying publicly, it's what are you choosing privately? What are you feeding your mind? What are you giving your time to? What habits are you reinforcing? Because those choices are either moving you closer to alignment or pulling you further away from it. Putting God first isn't about being shamed, it's about being transformed. It's about choosing him in the moments that don't get recognized, in the decisions that don't get applauded, in the spaces where it's just you and him. And when you learn to prioritize him there, it begins to impact every other area of your life, because what you build in private will always reveal itself in public. And when God is truly first in those unseen moments, it won't just be something you say. It will be something that shows up in everything you do. The real question isn't, do you believe in God? It's, does your life prove he comes first? Because belief by itself can be quiet, internal, even comfortable. It can exist without requiring much from you. You can believe and still remain unchanged. You can believe and still make the same choices, carry the same patterns, live the same cycles. But when God truly comes first, belief doesn't stay hidden, it becomes visible. It shows up in how you live, how you decide, how you respond when life doesn't go the way you expected. It's one thing to say you believe. It's another thing to build your life in a way that reflects that belief. Because what you truly believe will always influence how you behave. It will shape your priorities, your habits, your mindset. And if your life looks no different with God in it than it does without him, then it's worth asking whether he's truly first or simply present. There's a tension in that question because it requires honesty, not surface level honesty, but the kind that makes you pause and reflect on the patterns you've normalized, the kind that asks you to look at your daily life and evaluate what's actually guiding you. Is it your faith or is it your feeling? Is it your trust in God or your need for control? Is it your desire for purpose or your pursuit of comfort? Because life will always reveal what comes first, not in what you say during your strongest moments, but in how you respond during your weakest ones. When pressure rises, when uncertainty sets in, when things don't go according to plan, what do you fall back on? That's where your true foundation is exposed. That's where you find out whether God is truly first or whether something else has been quietly holding that position. And the truth is, many of us have built lives where God is included, but not centered. He's a part of the conversation, but not the foundation of it. We invite him into certain areas, but keep other areas off limits. We trust him with what feels manageable, but hold on tightly to what feels too important to release. And without realizing it, we create a life where God is present, but not prioritized. But when God is truly first, it changes the way you see everything. It doesn't mean your life becomes perfect. It doesn't mean you won't face challenges or experience moments of doubt. But it does mean that your perspective shifts. It means that your decisions are no longer driven solely by what you feel in the moment, but by what you know to be true. It means that your sense of identity is no longer tied to external validation, but anchored in something deeper. Because when God comes first, you begin to live from a place of alignment rather than reaction. You begin to make choices that reflect purpose rather than pressure. You begin to trust in ways that don't always make sense to others, because your confidence is not based on what you can see. It's based on who you know is guiding you. But that kind of life doesn't happen automatically. It requires intentionality. It requires you to examine the areas where your life and your belief don't match. The places where you say you trust God, but your actions suggest otherwise. The moments where you say he's first, but your choices reveal something else. And that's not about guilt, it's about growth. Because once you recognize the gap, you have the opportunity to close it. You have the opportunity to realign your life with what you say you believe. You have the opportunity to move from passive belief to active faith. Active faith looks like choosing trust when fear is easier. It looks like choosing obedience when comfort is more appealing. It looks like choosing to seek God's direction, even when you think you already have a plan. It's not always convenient and it's not always easy, but it's always transformative. And over time, those choices begin to build something within you. They begin to strengthen your character, deepen your trust, solidify your foundation. You start to notice that you're not as easily shaken by circumstances. You start to notice that your peace is not as dependent on outcome. You start to notice that you're growing, not just externally, but internally, in ways that are lasting and meaningful. Because when your life proves that God comes first, it's not about perfection. It's about consistency. It's about the repeated decision to bring him into every area of your life, to consult him in your decisions, to trust him in your uncertainty, To rely on him not just when you need something, but because you recognize that you need him in everything. And that consistency creates a life that is rooted, a life that is not easily swayed by every challenge or distraction, a life that reflects something deeper than temporary success or surface level fulfillment. It reflects a relationship, a connection, a commitment that goes beyond words. So the question remains, not just as something to think about, but as something to live out. Does your life prove that God comes first? Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but intentionally. In your choices, in your priorities, in your responses, in your everyday moment. Because belief is the starting point, but it was never meant to be the destination. It was meant to lead you into a life that reflects it. A life where your actions align with your faith, where your decisions reflect your trust, where your priorities reveal what truly matters to you. The real question isn't, do you believe in God? It's, does your life prove he comes first? And the answer to that question is not found in what you say. It's found in how you live every single day.